Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. So today's show, we're going to look at, I'm not sure if that was captured a second ago. I'm your host, Coco. Today's show, we're going to look at Africa and whether or not Maslow's theory was applicable to the continent and her people. For those of you who might not be aware, let me play a clip, a video here that talks about Maslow and his theory right here.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a theory in psychology. It argues that there are 5 stages of human needs that motivate our behavior. Abraham Maslow proposed his theory in 1943 after studying what he called exemplary people, such as Albert Einstein or Eleanor Roosevelt. First, there are physiological needs, such as the need to breathe, eat, drink, or sleep. The moment we get enough of that and we feel awake and our bellies are full, we get motivated by the next thing. Now we want safety. We try to earn money, build up resources, and look for shelter that protects us against dangers. Once we are satisfied and feel safe, we have time to think about what we want next. At stage 3, we seek love and belonging. We desire to be close to family and friends, belong to a society, or join a gang. But the moment we feel completely part of a group, we already wish to be a little different than the rest. At stage 4, we look for esteem, self-confidence, and respect from our peers. We want to be someone. If we have money, we buy a fancy watch. If we have a brain, we write or think or work a lot. Motivation to perform and compete is now at its highest. Students, sportsmen, and inventors excel. Neil Armstrong even flew to the moon. Only if we breathe and drink and eat and sleep enough, and we feel safe and part of a group and still special, only then can we reach level 5, self-actualization. Now we can relax, be creative, accept facts for what they are, give back or do whatever we want. No more pressure, unless of course there is trouble below. If you are a leader and believe in the theory, use it. First, make sure everyone has eaten that. Then, make them feel safe and help them belong to a group. Once they feel they belong, they are ready to stand out and excel. Thanks for watching. Even if we try to keep it short, each video is quite some work. First, we research and write a script. Then, we brainstorm ideas. And after that, we draw the storybook. Then, it's recorded, narrated, and finally edited.
So you get the idea of what Maslow's theory is. So before we begin reading the paper itself, you could kind of tell that Maslow's theory is one built off of individualism right, is built off the individual first before the group. And if you've been paying attention to recent episodes that I've been doing here on the channel, on the podcast, you'll know that we've been talking a lot about communalism, Ubuntu, looking at the humanism and our fellow Africans, etc. And you'll see that the African mindset is more group first, right? That all of us uplift each other. We don't focus on our individual selves so much. So already you could kind of see, where, in a sense, Maslow's pyramid should almost be, not necessarily upside down, but definitely rearranged, right? Definitely rearranged. Shout out to the pro-Black perspective in the chat room. Oni say, blessings to you, brother. So Oni is here just in time for me to begin the actual reading. I didn't realize there was a couple of white authors on this shit, so forgive me. But let's see what they have to say all the same, right? Maslow's theory of human motivation and its deep roots in individualism. Interrogating Maslow's applicability in Africa, which is the name of this actual podcast. So the abstract, like I always say, you should always start reading the abstract first. Since the postulation of Abraham Maslow's theory of human motivation, the theory has been celebrated as the determining factor to account for and explain human wants and needs. While the theory has its genealogy from an individualistic society, the United States of America, where it was crafted and propelled to take a stand as a universal theory determining human wants and needs across the world, little has been done to critically examine its seemingly perceived universality and applicability in societies such as those of Africa, where collectivism and conviviality beat centrality. The theory has enjoyed more acclamations than critical appraisals. This paper is a critical appraisal of Maslow's theory of human motivation. It examines the applicability and universality of the theory outside the context in which it was created, tested, and applied, such as Africa, before it received what seems to be a worldwide endorsement. Authors' observations in Southern Africa recognize behavior motivated by pursuit of relationships, strengthening of community, acknowledgement of authority, sharing and avoidance of shame. The paper concludes that the theory of Maslow is not applicable to many settings in Africa in the past or even today. The claim for universality of the model proposed by Maslow is therefore questioned, and its universal application is discredited. This conclusion calls for further interaction with the subject of human motivation outside of Maslow's framing by contextualizing such theories in space and time. So the abstract, as always, gives you a rough estimate of what the entire paper is about. But already you get an idea what this paper is basically going to hammer down on. It's going to hammer down who you are as an African and the ways of the African that you need to get back to. Right? In America, outside of Africa in particular, everything is about the individual. I mean, everything. And the thing that's holding us back in large part is that we can't seem to get over ourselves and instead work towards our collective. So when you see the fragmentation that's going on in the Black community currently, and historically, a part of it is because a lot of you guys subscribe to this Maslow thinking. There's a reason why almost every Black person who goes to a college who goes to college, they're introduced to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a conditioning, right? It's a conditioning for how you think you must live. When in reality, the same America where Maslow was doing this stuff, right? In reality, in his time to now time to before his time, right? Africans in America have not had, right, their basic needs covered. And that's the first rung of the ladder for Maslow. Basic needs being covered. When has the African in America had, as a group especially, have had their basic needs covered? If your basic needs aren't being covered, then the rest of the pyramid is just garbage, according to Maslow himself. But the thing that, like I said, that totally invalidates his theory, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of these authors, is that it's so based on the individual. It's all about I. Okay, I have my basic needs. I have my relationships. I have... When a lot of what we talk about is this curriculum, but it's also about like nation building. And when you're talking about nations, you're talking about something bigger than I, Anyway, let's see what they say. Let's see if they have any great points. I like when I read some of these papers and I get some real great points. Like one of the points that stuck with me from the last reading. Oh no, was it the last reading? I think it was the last reading or the reading before last, where, there was a quote that says, education is only second to war. Shout out to Arthur. I saw he commented that under the that same episode, the video on YouTube. Education is only second to warring, man. And so let's see if we can let's see if this paper will give us a nice little, a neatly wrapped, tidbit such as that one. So let's start with the introduction. In social studies, the theory of Abraham Maslow on human motivation is considered a seminal work. Frequently, Maslow's theory of human motivation is cited as a general description of the priorities of what humans need and want. There is no doubt that Maslow's reasoning, particularly his theory of hierarchies of needs and motivation, has proven helpful within the context of perspectives on growth and even equality, as Maslow emphasized the potential of every human being. In Maslow's thinking, the individual is seen as the most important actor, and his or her individual agency supersedes other motivations of action. Right there, we know that's not an African thing. Right? Based on what we've been reading in the last few weeks. As a humanistic psychologist, which is ironic, Maslow believed that every person has a strong desire to realize his or her full potential, to reach a level of self-actualization. He was the founder of the new movement of humanistic psychology that reached its peak in the 1960s and whose main point was to emphasize the positive potential of human beings. His thinking has deeply influenced the paradigm of the development agenda, both in theory and in practice, and set the foundation for moral thinking on individual entitlements. Maslow's theory was perhaps more a program than a theory, and practitioners have lamented that the theory is not aligned with reality. See that word program? That's to program it, right? As Graham and Messner in 1998 summarized, there are generally three major criticisms directed to Maslow's theory of motivation. There is scant empirical data to support the theoretical model. B, the studies assume human beings are similar and that the theory universally applies. And C, applications or validation of the theory do not concern themselves with a theory of motivation, but rather with theories of job satisfaction. All right. And by the way, a lot of so-called company leaders rely on Maslow's theory. And a part of the reason why, so this programming of Maslow more or less works in a capitalistic system. I saw I only glimpsed it, so I wasn't able to take it in, but I saw he posted something on Twitter today, like, it was a question. Do you think any and everyone can become a millionaire? And it's this type of program from Maslow that makes people think yes, right? But the reality, and I'm not sure where Onitase ended up going with that question, but the reality is not really. This criticism is supported by many other scholars in the field. The author and former philosophy professor Somers and practicing psychiatrist Sattel asserted that due to lack of empirical support, Maslow's ideas have fallen out of fashion and are no longer taken seriously in the world of academic psychology. So what they're really saying here is, like, have you put in the work? Did Maslow put in the work to measure this stuff? And in science, like, especially as the time progresses, in science, if you're going to be pushing research, you got to be pushing numbers too, right? You have to show where the number, you have to show that it's, well, first of all, in the scientific method, whenever you're designing an experiment, it has to be quantifiable, right? If you're going to come up with a theory, you have to have measured something, right? You had to, enumerate something. So, that's one of the first criticisms of his theory, right? Despite such fundamental criticism, the work remains standard literature in management studies, remember I talked about it a second ago, and other fields, and is part of standard curricula and textbooks for secondary education students. This paper adds to the existing criticism of the theory, but from an African perspective. Already we could see where Maslow's theory is fundamentally anti-African, but let's read on further. This paper problematizes a lack of empirical evidence, especially from other contexts such as those of Africa, and hence questions the claim of universality of the theory of human motivation. House and Aditya, 1997, demonstrated in their study of leadership from over 3,000 studies that 98% of the empirical evidence for theoretical development is rather distinctly American in character. And that's the thing, too. We talk about this all the time. And even myself, I have to chastise and criticize, like, a lot of the stuff that we do is American-centered, right? When you listen to, like, Onitase and those guys, again, just to mention them again, one of the big criticisms they have of, like, Dr. Amos Wilson is that they're American-centered, right? So a lot of the work, W.E.B. Du Bois was American-centered. So a lot of the stuff that we internalize is fundamentally American, which is fundamentally European, which is fundamentally, enemy of us, right? Although Maslow's theory is taught as an explanatory universal model, Maslow's theory is not validated in contexts or environments other than those where the theory was created. The validation outside of a Western framework is important, given that Maslow's theory emerged from an American cultural setting characterized by individualism. In this cultural context, the individual is the point of reference, and the realization of the individual is the highest goal. The question of whether Maslow's theory of human motivation is universally applicable is important, as much of the world that Galtung refers to as the periphery does not resonate with putting the individual as the focus of human motivation. In many parts of the world, it is the group or the community and the attributes the group reflects upon its members that are central and considered worthy to be pursued. All right? That's where you come from. As African folks, this is where you come from. In Southern Africa, for example, the philosophy of Ubuntu is at the center of all human sphere, whether economic, religious, political, or cultural. In Ubuntu, it is the group and not individuals that motivate daily endeavors, design, and behavior. It's the group, people. It's the group. We got to stop this individualistic thinking. We think too much about, how things hit for us. And who's the model of Maslow's theory in Black society is your people like Tariq Nasheed and them. Boyce Watkins and them. All these skinning, grinning, and crying Negroes on television. What's my man name again? Roland Martin. What's the other crying Negro? I just talked about him on the Harsh Reality podcast. Make sure you guys tune into the other shows on KWAZ Radio, by the way. Van Jones, right? These guys are the Black representatives of Maslow's theory. If you listen to Tariq talk, it's essentially Maslow's theory. If you look at what he does, it's essentially a reflection of this theory. The paper is an attempt to provide some suggestions of motivational realities in Southern Africa as a caution for positioning and applying Maslow's theory as a universal theory. In many indigenous cultures in Southern Africa, the group and the moderating role of cultural factors influence human motivation as opposed to Maslow's individual as the determining force. And a lot of African leadership post colonialism are also, the images I conjure up when I think of Maslow's theory as well. Okay? Only to say Van Jones, that's correct. Maslow's theory of motivation. The starting point for Maslow's theory is the question, what motivates behavior? According to Maslow, our actions as human beings are motivated in order to achieve certain needs. Maslow first introduced his concept of a hierarchy of needs, and motivation in his 1943 paper, A Theory of Human Motivation, and his subsequent book in 1954, Motivation and Personality, both of which I've read. Maslow introduced a new area of attention in the field of psychology. While psychological theories and schools of thought were dominated by psychoanalysis and behaviorism, psychology focused heavily on problematic behaviors. Maslow, on the other hand, was more interested in learning and understanding what motivates people. He was also much interested in comprehending what people do in order to achieve what makes them happy. As a humanist psychologist, Maslow believed that people have an innate desire to be self-actualized. That is, the desire to be all they can fully be. Yet for Maslow, in order to achieve these ultimate goals of what people really want to be, a number of more basic needs must be met, such as the need for food, safety, love, and self-esteem, amongst others. While the theory is generally known as the hierarchy of needs, he never displayed his theory as a pyramid. Depicted in terms of a pyramid, however, the lowest levels are made up of the most basic needs, while the more complex needs are located at the top of the pyramid. The needs at the bottom of the pyramid are basic physical requirements, including the need for food, water, shelter, and warmth. But for people to move on to the next level of needs, which are mainly for safety and security, the lower level needs have to be met first. This is one reason why Maslow explains as people progress, their needs become increasingly psychological and social to the extent that the need for love, friendship, and intimacy become more important than any other needs. Yet as we go even further from this level of the pyramid, the need for personal esteem and feelings of accomplishment become more important than those at the lower levels. And traditionally, like, that's not us either. I think, and this is why I always thought about this when I listen to the kind of music we tend to make, Africans tend to make, you know, Africans in the Caribbean and stuff like. It's always, if you notice something, it's always about love. It's only when this phenomenon, and I remember when it started, when this phenomenon of like gangster rap and stuff happened, where it became about kill, 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 die, bitch, this, that, and the other. But before that, you know, for the most part, if you look at black music, for example, the message was mostly about love. Because to us, love is greater than the other stuff, right? If you guys think I'm wrong, in the chat room, you could put in the chat room to say, hey, I don't think love is a thing that's the greatest thing to us as African folks, or what have you. But that's just my take, and I've always noticed that as a kid. When I look at music from a certain time, go backwards, the message is always a kind of a love message for us, you know, in the continent, in the Caribbean, and at one time even here in the States, right? So Maslow's 5 levels of the hierarchy of needs. Maslow in 43 distinguishes 5 different levels of needs to which he assigns different levels of relevance. If I may assign, by the way, before I continue, let me say a quick thing. You'll notice in the live stream, I have a phone number up there, and it says call or text. What it really should say is text me. I don't pick up my personal phone for everyone who calls me, much less, right? So text me. I had a brother, or maybe it was a sister, I'm not even sure, but I think it was a brother who thought I said something that I didn't say, or misunderstood something I said in a previous episode when I talked about African women and nation building. And he was calling the number, and without context of who's calling, I'm not picking that up. But, you know, eventually we started to text back and forth, and he kind of laid out, you know, what he disagreed with, and that's fine. So I prefer, if you guys are going to reach out and I don't know you, text me. And I'll gladly, you know, answer your questions by text. If you have questions that you want me to answer on air, I'll gladly do that for you too. Okay? Yeah. So back to this paper. Maslow in 1943 distinguishes 5 different levels of needs to which he assigns different levels of relevance. Quote, if I may assign arbitrary figures for the sake of illustration, it is as if the average citizen is satisfied perhaps 85% in his psychological needs, 70% in his safety needs, 50% in his love needs, 40% in his self-esteem needs, and 10% in his self-actualization needs. And those numbers, I can tell you, are not true of us. As a matter of fact, in the comment section or in the chat room, if you're live with me, tell me what you think those percentages really are for Black folks, for African people, right? If we were to draw a diagram, a pyramid for that matter, to represent the hierarchy of needs as explained by Maslow, the psychological needs would need to represent a much bigger piece of the pyramid. The 5 different levels in Maslow's hierarchy are as follows. Psychological needs include the most basic needs that are vital to survival, such as the need for food, air, for water, air, food, and shelter, As Maslow believed, these needs are the most basic and instinctive needs in the hierarchy, because all needs become secondary until these psychological needs are met. Maslow added that most of these lower level needs are probably fairly apparent. This is because everyone, as long as she or he is human, needs food and water to survive, but also need to breathe and maintain a stable body temperature. Besides eating, drinking, and having adequate shelter and clothing, Maslow also suggested that the other important psychological basic need was sexual, that is, reproduction. So, a couple things. The thing about these these physiological needs is you have to question your black self and ask, am I getting these physiological needs, and how? And maybe even the third question, from whom? And that's why the idea of nation building is so important. Right here, these folks who subscribe to this thinking, and in fact they have done it, right? They realize that in this system that you're in, they cut off these physiological needs from you, or make it very difficult for you to attain. You know, there's a white guy who was working for one of these big companies like Nestle or something, who was talking about, yeah, clean water is not a privilege, right? Like, I'm sorry, clean water is something that should be charged for. You should pay for clean water. You're not just privileged to have clean water. You should pay for that. You should pay a premium for clean water. And so this is where you got to look at some of these things sometimes. And you got to ask yourself, well, hold on. Where am I getting these needs met from? Or from whom am I getting these needs met from? Right? And so this is one of the things you guys got to start really thinking about. Like, when someone controls, if we were to just work in Maslow's theorem, right? His little pyramid scheme here. If we were to work in that scheme as African people, we will be perpetual losers, because these guys control where you get your water from, where you get your food from. People talk about food deserts in the hood. Why are there food deserts in the hood? Because you aren't producing your own food. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. It's important to think about everything in terms of your black self. Next was security needs. You know, as a matter of fact, these guys even control your the basic physiological need of sexual reproduction. The other day, only time I said was reading this book, The Prince, this Machiavelli book, The Prince, and you know, he only was talking about it in terms of it being like the blueprint for colonialism. And as you listen to the episode, go and listen to those last two episodes I think he did, right? Go listen to those episodes and listen to the reading of the book and the commentary that he's given. And you'll see that, wow, there's something to this. Like, this is how they go about, you know, colonizing people. And if you listen to Maslow's theorem here, you can see how they've kind of used that within this paradigm that we live in, this capitalistic system, to enact certain things upon you. Security needs. Security needs include the desire for safety and security. Security needs are important for survival, but they are not as demanding as the physiological needs. Example of security needs include a desire for steady employment, healthcare, safe neighborhoods, and shelter from the environment. Again, where are you getting these needs, right? For these needs to be met for you, for your African self, where are you getting them from? So when the brother says that, yo, you're a population within a nation, not a nation within a nation, he's correct. A nation governs itself, right? How do you ensure that you have steady employment? You can't. How do you ensure that you have health care? You really can't ensure it. Safe neighborhoods. How do you have safe neighborhoods? You gotta have these cops around to have any kind of protection in your neighborhoods. And again, you don't control that, which is obvious to you because these cops are gunning you down in your neighborhood sometime. Shelter from the environment. Who are you renting from? Who are you, who do you pay to keep a roof over your head? These needs become a bit more complex at this point in the hierarchy as they are considered higher than physiological needs. And when the more basic survival needs have been fulfilled, people begin to feel that they need more control and order to their lives. People begin to concern themselves with safety in terms of where they live, financial security, physical safety, and staying healthy. Next is the social needs. Social needs include needs for belonging, love, and affection, right? Again, this stuff here is the foundation of being an African, right? Social needs include needs for belonging, love, and affection. Maslow described these needs as less basic and physiological than physiological and security needs. This tells you the mindset of the people that you're up against. These people don't really put this stuff here that high, in much higher regard. That's why blowing you and your kid and your children's brains out is not a problem. They're unaffected by that because they don't put too much stock into this type of shit. Relationships such as friendships, romantic attachments, and families help fulfill this need for companionship and acceptance. Also involvement in social, community, or religious groups, right? Esteem needs. When the first three needs have been satisfied, esteem needs become increasingly important. Esteem needs include the need for things that reflect on self-esteem, personal worth, social recognition, and accomplishment. At this point, it becomes important to gain the respect and appreciation of others. People have a need to accomplish things and then have their efforts recognized. People often engage in activities such as going to school, playing a sport, enjoying a hobby, or participating in professional activities in order to fulfill this need. Satisfying this need and gaining acceptance and esteem helps people become more confident. Failing to gain recognition for accomplishments, however, can lead to feelings of failure and inferiority. That's why, that's why you stress the education so much. Because the education keeps you grounded, keeps you grounded, or what's the word? Yoked to your community. The community is never forgotten throughout the education. So, at the end of this kind of African-centered education, yeah, you might be interested in doing some things, and you might be interested in some recognition, I guess, But really, that comes along the way of doing the work for the community. It's not really our thing, or it's not supposed to really be our thing to be doing stuff for personal accolades. When I see that personal accolade shit from black folks, especially black folks in the conscious community, that really irks me. This is why I don't really bother with a lot of folks out there in the conscious community anymore. Because, folks are looking for personal big ups, and I'm not really out here for that. I want to see what you're doing that uplifts the whole community, right? And the same for me. I want to see that I'm doing something that uplifts the community. I'm not doing it so I could be one of these African dictators with a bunch of stars and stripes and shit. And I never was even in the infantry of the African army, right? Self-actualizing needs. Self-actualizing needs assume the highest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Self-actualizing people are self-aware, concerned with personal growth, less concerned with the opinions of others, and interested in fulfilling their potential. So right here again, we have confirmation of how anti-African this theorem is, right? Let's just listen to the words. You're self-aware, so it's about you, the individual. You're concerned with personal growth, you, the individual. You're less concerned with the opinions of others, you, the individual. And interested in fulfilling your own potential. And there's nothing wrong with being interested in fulfilling your potential, but it has to be in service of others. And that's something I hope to see we improve in, especially and even in the conscious community. This need to be right all the time or what have you. It's just it's just not the way we do things, or the way we're supposed to do things based on our African nature. Right? Criticism against Maslow's theory over the years. From the fame that Maslow's theory has gathered over the years, it is clear that Maslow's contribution to psychology was momentous. Yet while some research shows some support for Maslow's theories, most research has not been able to substantiate the idea of a needs hierarchy. For example, Waba and Bredel in 1976, for example, reported that there was little evidence for Maslow's ranking of these needs, and even less evidence that these needs are in a hierarchical order. And, this is the thing with science, but this is really a thing with life, right? I think it was, Jay-Z said it in a song, funny enough, but you got to question everything. You got to question it all. How does a person come up with ranking these needs? How did Maslow do it? Did he do it? Or is this something he pulled completely out of his asshole? You got to question everything, especially when it comes from outside of our community, right? Not everything is for us. As Nadler and Lawler in 1979, Denning in 2010, and Rutledge in 2011 point out, other criticism of Maslow's theory note that his definition of self-actualization is difficult to test scientifically. Maslow's research on self-actualization was also based on a very limited sample of individuals, including people he knew, as well as biographies of famous individuals that Maslow believed to be self-actualized, such as Albert Einstein and Eleanor Roosevelt. Look at the people who Maslow was studying. What African insight. Based on psychological research of human coping mechanisms, Graves in 1970 provided an alternative theoretical perspective on human behavior. He described an open system of theory on values. His theory was worked out in Spiral Dynamics by Beck and Cohen in 2005. The theory was used in South Africa, but validating the theory during turbulent times and beyond. Graves recognized units of cultural information, so-called memes, spreading from person to person. Beck color-coded the memes in a spiraling hierarchy of motivations for behavior. Let's see what these people got to say. Number one is tribal, right? Safety-driven. They gave that a beige color. Number two is exploitive, power-driven. They gave that a red color. Number three is authority. Sorry. Sorry about that. Number three is authority, order-driven, given a blue color. Strategy, success-given, given an orange color. Social, people-driven, given a green color. Systems, process-driven, given a yellow color. And holistic, that's number 7, given a turquoise color. The lack of a perspective that human beings function in groups has been addressed by Pinto in 2000, a Dutch scholar studying intercultural communications. He calls for a revision of Maslow's pyramid to address the motivation of people in group settings. He points to the emergence of group focus arising due to economic circumstances, religious influences, peer groupings, or individual choices. He proposes a different motivational hierarchy relevant for such settings. 1, primary needs. 2, group pleasing. 3, good name. 4, honor. Would you guys use those groupings instead of Maslow's groupings? And you know, this guy's a Dutch guy, so again, I'm not too big on anything those folks have to say. These concerns reveal the absence of congruence and agreement in the sequencing of human needs. Like the progression as proposed by Maslow, there is strong indication of variations in labeling and sequencing of needs fulfillment in different contexts. Alternative propositions approach human motivation from different, like academic perspectives. However, positing the heuristic nature of a simplification of Maslow's theory of motivation continues to be taught. This is problematic, especially in communal societies like those in Africa. Therefore, there is need for dialogue informed by inputs from alternative paradigm and epistemological positions. In the chat room, Onita Say from the pro-black perspective says, these white folk thinking of white folk. We got to stop thinking they thinking of us. And that's absolutely correct. You know, that's why I don't really take anything white folks talk about, and I try my damnedest not to internalize much of what they talk about. What I instead try to do, I internalize the way they think about stuff, and I internalize their history as it pertains to our history. So I look at them, I study them, just like they study us, right? But I try and you know, I know someone, a family member who listens to Fox News and all these different things. And I'm like, dude, why are you listening to those guys? And his claim is, well, he's doing it so that he can understand, you know, how these people think and whatnot. My thing is, I don't have to be immersed daily in how they, you know, think or their general discourse to kind of understand who or what they are. There's enough history to kind of know who, not to kind of, but to know who and what they are, right? And so I keep those things in mind. I know, for example, when you're talking about a vaccine, for example, I know you ain't thinking about me with your vaccine stuff. You know, the only thing you're thinking about me is to be a guinea pig in your vaccine business, right? And I'm not anti-science, of course. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm just saying that You ain't going to rush to create a vaccine for COVID and expect my big black ass to be out there getting shot up with the shit that you just rushed to put together. Nah. Right? Because I know you ain't care. You don't care about me. You don't care if it kills me, right? So we, as Oni said in the chat room, he's right. We got to stop thinking when these people talking, they talking about us. And if they are talking about us, it's in a negative light. Dialoguing with Maslow from an African perspective. So now we're starting to get to the heart of this thing. In South Africa, while studying the facets of local entrepreneurship, Hart, Jacobs, and Mountqualaza in 2012, and their team at the Human Sciences Research Council found that rural communities mention a different set of motivations for economic actions, right? Respondents deem quality of life and group harmony as their prime motivations for behavior. Black folks listening to this program today, do you consider quality of life and group harmony? Is that your prime motivation for your behaviors? Because when I think about some of the people around me who are positive folks who are trying to build and make stuff happen, to me, they are indeed pushing for a better quality of life for African people, right? And for a group harmony. So do you think, this is a question I'm throwing out there for those here live or those on the playback, do you think that what we as African people seek out most is quality of life, group harmony, and are those things the things that that are prime motivations that produce the behaviors that we have? This aligns with Schenneberger and Van Stam's 2011 exposition of the consistence of motivation for particular economic interaction in rural Zambia, the so-called relatio economy. Relatio economy, okay. Wegeland, 2014, described the mechanics of this motivation through the mathematics of an economy of giving after witnessing such behavior, in rural Africa. There is much evidence of strenuous and discordant situations due to motivational variance. This subjects and exposes Maslow's theory to the spotlight. One is left with no option but to question and test whether the theory works in alternate contexts. Such studies are remarkably low in number. As an example, in their multinational study, Tay and Diener, 2011, showed there was a weak alignment with Maslow's thinking, but strong indication that social conditions influence the sequencing of fulfillment of basic security and psychosocial needs. However, it seems Maslow's concepts and theories have enjoyed more comfort than they deserve, not only in the context in which they were produced. We agreed at Graham et al. In 2015 that the underlying asymmetrical relations in the politics of knowledge production and dissemination is accelerated by a lopsided geography of information. Bigi Ramana in 2001 and Gibson 2011 have independently shown the distinct differences in motivation of people in post-independence leadership positions in Africa versus the motivation of the indigenous population. Let's just let that sink in, right? They have independently shown the distinct differences in motivation of people in post-independence leadership positions in Africa versus the motivation of the indigenous population. How do you think that plays out? In previous works, Van Stam in 2014 showed the variance in African context and motivation within the academic realm and the importance and sustainability of orality. Further in the field of activism, there is a whole range of literature depicting the colonization effect of Western framing of realities, derived upon schema provided by Maslow, among others. I'm going to highlight that. I think I'm going to read that again. I like that. Further in the field of activism, there is a whole range of literature depicting the colonization effect of Western framing of realities, in brackets, derived upon schema provided by Maslow, among others. For instance, from the Canadian setting, Alfred and Contassel in 2005 link human motivation with land, language, freedom, diet, and indigenous resurgence. Human motivation linked with land, something to ponder. Land, language, freedom, diet, and indigenous resurgence. More than 10 years of action research in Southern Africa in ever-evolving cycles of planning action, observation, and contemplation provides input for this paper to substantiate the incompatibility of Maslow's thought within the indigenous African context. Observations took place during many different circumstances of the authors. These roles were mostly in parallel and sometimes consecutive. National and international academics, researchers, educators, and professors, technical director in a foreign-funded medical research institute, advisors to leading individuals in professional institutes in Africa and further afield, leaders and volunteers in professional bodies, social entrepreneurs, and executive director of rural cooperative. Okay. We have endeavored to unearth indigenous practical motivations. Work focused on rural areas in South Africa with a focus on Zambia and less in the urban areas, with most of the African population living in the rural areas. Views espoused in rural areas were regarded as the most significant and culturally sound. So this is the, experimental design that they're describing here. Which that last point I'm all for. I don't have a problem per se with that last part of the design. Sensitivity towards the enshrined forms of information and knowledge transfer, for example, Van Stam 2013. The collaborativity in communities and the interaction with local stakeholders constituted the research grounding within various social contexts or institutes, cooperative activities, practices, and human qualities, virtues. Each of these entities applies ethics, models, and act upon moral judgments informed by ethics based upon respective worldviews. Ubuntu is an African philosophy of humanness that emphasizes the virtues of sharing, peace, unity, and harmony in society. It represents a view of self as in co-living with the other, right? And we talked about this in recent weeks on the show. Ubuntu involves empathy and focuses on wholeness of the conglomerate, whether a household, family, or community of any sort. It acknowledges that facts are relational or contextual and incorporate many components and transfers everything into an embodiment in people, or holism. Ubuntu is a metaphor that embodies the significance of human solidarity and stands explicitly against inequality or isolating individualism. Within Ubuntu, all interactions are oriented towards the common ground, the community, the family, the birth relationships, and in relation to the physical land. The latter is congruent with African science, where three facets of existence are taken into account: the physical, the spiritual, and the interaction between the two. That's a good paragraph right there. This concept, this concept of Ubuntu, we really gotta start to promote that more. In indigenous African interactions, reality is approached equal to a commons. Equal to a commons. The prime motivations for interactions are relationships and community. The prime motivations for interactions are relationships and community. This is why, like, when you hear, and I'm going to touch on something else here too, but when you hear like Neely Fuller say stuff like, you got to stay away from other black folks. In a very dumbed down outlook on the situation, you could kind of understand what he's saying. The problem is he doesn't elevate any higher than that dumbed down view. And then what happens is, like I've said before, because the dummies are teaching the class now, they're teaching this dumbed down view of black society. But the reality is, your prime motivation is supposed to be interacting with and uplifting members of our community. We're supposed to want to be around one another, forging new relationships and building our community. But the thing is, what we do, we do go around people all the time, which is what I think Neely Fuller was talking about, but he never, like I say, he never elevated the thought, right? We'll go out to these clubs and to the backyard party and all this other old bullshit where, invariably a shootout happens. I was watching this guy Vlad a couple years ago on Vlad TV, and he had some black guys, so I don't know who they were. I've never heard of them at the time, never heard about them since. But they were talking about growing up like in Compton and how, like, as teenagers, 14, 15, 16-year-old guys, they would go to these house parties knowing there was going to be a shooting at that party. So when you talk about Neely Fuller and that whole concept of we should stay away from it, when you were talking about it compared to like that story from Vlad TV, where these guys were like nonchalantly saying, yeah, we used to go to parties and we knew it was going to be a shooting at it, So when you hear these guys talk about, we lost a homie, died, right in front of, it's because you go into these places that are so low energy. Look up the past episode I did on that. Talking about low energy individuals. Stay away from low energy individuals. But outside of that, what you want to be doing is forging these relationships with your black brother, black sister. And try to bring them into this concept of community. So when you hear people talking about organizing and joining organizations, that's why, right? And frankly, that's who we are. These can be witnessed during elaborate greetings and inquiries into family well-being, affirming respect, and aiming to reestablish and confirm relationship on a continuous basis. Our observations can be summarized through a list this is so written so badly. Our observation can be summarized through a list with variations in emphasis between an Ubuntu tradition and Western traditions, augmented from Van Stam in 2012, dualistically presented in Table 1. So we look at, on the left is the Ubuntu tradition, on the right is Western tradition. On the left, it's relatio. So under Ubuntu, there's relatio. Western tradition is ratio. Under Ubuntu is who. Western tradition is what. Under Ubuntu is community. Under Western, it's individual. Under Ubuntu, it's responsibilities. Under Western tradition, it's rights. Under Ubuntu, it's relationships. Under Western tradition, is goods. Ubuntu is character. Western is credentials. Ubuntu is member. Western is actor. Ubuntu is paradox. Western is consistency. Ubuntu is history. Western is future. Ubuntu is orality. Western is literacy. Ubuntu is authority. Western is power. Ubuntu is proven. Western is emerging. You hear a lot about emerging in Western society. Ubuntu is reactive. Western is proactive. Now we could question. We could question. This could be a whole other episode. Are all the things on the left greater than all the things on the right? Are all the things on the left more useful to the African than all the things on the right? So, for example, is being reactive good, or is being for the African, or is being proactive better? For example, Ubuntu is paradox. Western is consistency. Ubuntu is elaborate. Western is concise. Ubuntu is existence. Western is essential. I do like this table though. In the comment section, comment on your feelings towards this table that emphasizes dissimilarities in Ubuntu and Western traditions. Most analytical tools for cultural differences come from the seminal works of Hofstede, Hall, Kluckhohn, Strobbeck, Carbo, and Trompensars. It must be noted that all these experts emerge from a Western background. As the list of diverge emphasis and traditions, like Table 1, can be of any length in our diversified world and will change over time, these kinds of lists basically show contemporary differences in cultural codings. For an explanation of underlying reasons, the enshrined norms and values should ideally be informed by indigenous sources. Absolutely. Right? I would much prefer to hear about this from fully African researchers. Only time I say in the chat room says that a brother was telling him human rights was Western, and here it is. Yeah, this table is this table that I just read that emphasizes the similarities between Ubuntu and Western tradition. It is kind of heavy. It's a low key. That's why I said this could be a whole episode by itself. It's a low key, heavy table, right? The West is talking about rights, where we talk about responsibilities. Right? It's my responsibility to do X, Y, and Z. Right? But you're right, it's my responsibility to do X, Y, and Z. Right? Whereas like the West is like, yo, it's my right to do it, which shows like a selfish kind of personal type thing again, you know. But my responsibility is for those around, for me and others around me, right? That's kind of cool, actually. Let me just check something here. Let me just finish this off and then take a quick break and come right back. Where was I? Such input is greatly needed, especially in assessment of the underlying structures and their effects in the field of human motivation. Right. So that last line was talking about, you really want to get your information, right, your understanding from the indigenous sources, from the people that you're studying, right? These inputs show how Maslow's theory of motivation does not align with nor includes concepts of human motivation in an African setting. African epistemology, like Ubuntu, however, does provide for such input if a harmonized, globally valid theory of motivation would exist. We contend such can be deducted only through an intellectual journey allowing for diversity. So we reach this part called Finding the African Context, but I want to take a quick station break. I'll be right back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back. Just want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank everyone who's here live with me as I'm reading this. It's a pleasure to have you guys on. It's, very, very motivational. Like I just played those spots just now for KWAZ Radio. One of the persons whose spot I played is, only to say from the pro-black perspective. He's usually a regular when I do these shows. He's usually here in the chat room. I want you guys to make sure check out his work. I'm talking about top to bottom. Check out his books. One of the first interviews I did on this show was actually only to say we were discussing his book, the pro-black Compendium. I still have to talk to him about his most recent book, The Book of Power. But make sure check him out. Make sure check out all the work he's doing. And check out the Harsh Reality Podcast and the Queen's Council, everything on KWAZ Radio. While I'm at it too, hey, if you guys are interested in podcasting, you see the kind of shows that we have on KWAZ Radio. We talking pro-black, black nationalist, pan-Africanist type shows. We do things slightly different, each of us. If you feel like you could contribute, a show, and you could be consistent with it, and you have a lane that you like to take, right? A lane that you like to, elevate your voice with. By all means, man, come through. Shoot an email over to kwaz.radio@gmail.com, and let's try to get you on board. And that goes for you if you're in the Caribbean, if you're in West Africa, any part of Africa, America. Once you're black, once you believe in us as black people, once you want to see us do better, improve, not do better, but improve our standing in this world, access power, creating access power for ourselves, then by all means, if you have a show idea, then pitch it to KWAZ Radio, okay? Also, I have the work that I'm doing with the curriculum. I saw Renee in the chat. Let me see. Renee had said something in the chat. Renee says, I'm not sure I understand paradox versus consistency. They seem like they're in the wrong columns. Question mark. Paradox, Western, and consistency, Ubuntu. So let's go to the definition of paradox, right? So paradox would be a situation, person, or thing that combines contradictory features or qualities, right? And they were comparing that to consistency. If I'm not mistaken, what I think is being described here is African folks understand that there's contradictions, right? That not everything is always the same. Whereas in the West, they push this concept of what's the word? Reproducibility, like everything is made the same each time, right? So if I'm not mistaken, in my understanding of that, but that's a good question, Renee. In my understanding, I think it's the idea we understand the humanness of people. We understand is, within a person, for example, there are contradictions, like I heard Only talk about this the other day, and I read about this on the show a couple weeks ago, or some months ago. Like, if we say the word, if we say the name Marcus Garvey, those of us who know would be like, the prophet, the visionary, right? The person to mold, the African to probably most emulate, if you're going to emulate someone else, right? But if you listen to, Amy Jacques or Jacques Garvey, you'll see, like, not the greatest husband, maybe not even the greatest father, right? Because the work that he was doing took precedence, right? And so I think, so in that sense, the Garvey would be that, that contradiction, right? Versus the Western ideal of someone like Garvey would be, you're supposed to be the same way in all things you do. I hope that helps. I hope I'm understanding that correctly. I hope that helps. If anyone else in the chat, Oni, or anyone else wants to jump in on that question, feel free. I'll read off the responses to you guys on air. So we're at the findings in the African context. Nakazibwe in 2015 shows how rational decision-making on prior needs by women farmers follows very different logics than the one provided in commodity chain thinking. This points to the need to look at how human motivation manifests itself in a gender. Nakazibwe shows how women prioritize a commodity not because of an individual desire for profit that can be made, but because of the access to group processes that it gives and the information exchange, support, mechanisms, and cultural approval derived from this. An example is pastoralist decision-making to sell title deeds after group land division because the land and cattle belongs to the pastoralist anyway, so the value of the individual title deeds does not exist in this logic. When that brother was calling me the other day to tell me he think I got something wrong in my commentary on the episode about nation building and the role of the African woman. One of his arguments, or his main argument, was based on the Spartans who would bury their soldiers in a plot and I guess put some some type of medal or something, some trophy or something on top of the plot. And then they'll bury the women who weren't warriors, weren't involved in warring, but, you know, they had the quote unquote traditional woman roles, right? And my thing is, like, you know, we aren't Spartans. You know, we aren't Spartans, we are Africans. This was my response to him. And there was a time when, you know, things were simpler, where women had a certain role, but as things became more necessary to be more technologically advanced, to keep up with what's going on, we have to at least give the option for our women to be shoulder and shoulder with us in other spheres of nation building. We can't just, you know, say, hey, that role is to push out babies and stuff. Yeah, that's a part of it too. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, what if a woman doesn't want to have children? What if she can't have children? What if she doesn't want to have children? Like, you know, we got to put it in there. You know, what if she decides her life is better suited, not in the production of more Africans, but in the production of programs or what have you, towards building a more powerful Africa? Are we going to deny that spirit because we want to put them in a box and jam them, you know, in this box just to do this one thing? Nah, that's a kind of a European thing to do. We need to have, like a friend of mine's, when I was organizing in college, right? I had this friend named Shaka, and guy said to me, he said, yo, these, you know, these folks be complaining about women wearing pants and stuff like that. Let me tell you something. When the fighting starting, when the fight begins, you ain't want no one having to hold down their skirt during the fight. So put them pants on if you have to. You understand what I'm saying? You have to adapt. You have to adapt, right? And so, you know, this little reading right here just reminded me of the idea that a lot of times when we speak about stuff, we don't speak about it from a gender perspective as well, right? So a lot of people will look at what Maslow was talking about and say, not only is it anti-African, but it's anti-woman at that. Where was I? This points to the need to look at how human motivation manifests itself in gender. Nakazibwe shows how women prioritize a commodity not because of an individual desire for profit that can be made, but because of the access to group processes that it gives and the information exchange, support mechanisms, and cultural approval derived from this. An example is pastoralist decision-making to sell title deeds after group land division because the land and cattle belongs to the pastoralists anyway. So the value of the individual title deeds does not exist in this topic. I know I read that before. I just wanted to read it again. From the researchers' observations in the lived reality of Southern Africa, the following African components of human motivation can be derived in no particular order as the pursuit of relationships, strengthening of community, acknowledgement of authority, sharing and avoidance of shame. Sharing and avoidance of shame. You know, those Caribbean folks, right? We have this thing, it's actually kind of a saying like, look, man, I ain't in the shame thing, you know, so don't embarrass me out here type thing, right? So we have this avoidance of shame thing as African people. It's funny, the acknowledgement of authority, I should have only to say right about that in the chat room. He has to battle some folks who don't understand, you know, the acknowledgement of authority in certain settings. It's fundamental to point out that absence of the satisfaction of these needs in an African perspective leads to inertia, which can be either active or passive. Active inertia is executed in non-actions like withholding of or deriving access to information, exclusion, or excommunication, while passive inertia includes numbing of expressions and or actions, which eventually leads to isolation. In conformity with Maslow's reasoning for certain conditions which are immediate prerequisites to need satisfaction, the following constructive behaviors are observed in the African context. Express permission grounded in lasting relationships, tangible production with sustainable achievements through commendable actions in the community, capacity development, building abilities in communities within existing structures of authority, honorable representation through recognition of wholesome conglomerate of people, resources, and ecology. I feel I should read that again. In conformity with Maslow's reasoning for certain conditions which are immediate prerequisites to need satisfaction, the following constructive behaviors are observed in the African context. Okay. Express permission, grounded in lasting relationships, tangible production with sustainable achievements through commendable actions in the community, capacity development, building abilities in communities within existing structures of authority, honorable representation through recognition of wholesome conglomerate of people, resources, and ecology. So that brings us to this discussion part of the paper. Renee Moore says that's helpful. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. I hope my understanding is along the lines of what they're talking about. Discussion. Communications and negotiations on commons are hampered by Western-centric mix of theories, among which is Maslow's pyramid, ethics models, and their hermeneutic and existential interpretations. Murphy and Ellis in 1996 in, quote, On the Moral Nature of the Universe, end quote, describe a helpful layering of science, each layer building abstraction with the input from the layer below, or by perceiving apart aspects of the levels above. The aforementioned scholars describe a science of ethics spanning the social and applied sciences. This model provides guidance on how to deal with a mix of ethical models that influence motivation for human behavior emanating from different worldviews. It is only recently in the West, in the late modern period, circa 1900s to 1990, that the concept of pure individual power has emerged, that sanctifies the view that one can do as one likes with one's person and one's property. Murphy's Law, right? This view has been adopted in and subsequently propagated by the West. It is this concept of power of the individual that is a precept in Maslow's thought. His thought emerges from a focus on the individual and her or his agency, ultimately expressing him or herself in a fullest and healthiest creativeness. The authors observed that the approach to motivations framed within an individualistic view on the reason of activities, as proposed by Maslow, is unsuitable for understanding genuinely social processes like the African epistemology as set in Ubuntu, which does not provide moral grounding for self-renunciating effects. General examples of a communal agency are African sayings like, it takes a community to raise a child, it takes a village to raise a child, implying that even for the most basic needs, the physiological needs in Maslow's reasoning, a balance is sought in agency vested in community and individuals. Therefore, a motivation to engender community can be seen as amongst the most basic needs. As Africa is an environment with abundance of resources, Unwin, 2008, the fulfillment of primary needs is seen as a collaborative venture of communities, individuals, and the spiritual realms. that's something to take in for a second, right? Like, when you live in a place where it fulfills you, it gives you what you need, right? As opposed to a place like outside, as opposed to like the West, where everything is a struggle, right? You know, and that's what Maslow was building his theory off of. Places like America where everything is a struggle. You know, you walk around here like in New York and you see trees that bear no fruit. Whereas like in the Caribbean, you see trees, you see this many trees, you sure to see one of them is a mango tree or pawpaw or something, right? Dilly or something you could eat, you know? And so you'll eat something. You know, I'm sure the same is true in the continent, right? But out here, everything is a struggle, even basic needs. And so you cannot apply that thinking to a people that live in regions of the world that have resources around them, right? The dominant Western view shown by Maslow, whereas like America and Europe and stuff is a competition for resources. The dominant Western view shown by Maslow represents an external influence in proceedings, ethics, and judgments in Africa. For instance, pure science employ Maslow's contextually loaded concepts of human nature, such as assumptions about the intrinsic egoism of individuals, conceptions of human dignity, or more broadly, views on human good or human flourishing. Therefore, African practitioners' interaction with Western academics is hampered. Maslow's, see that tells you kind of all you need to know. Maslow's precepts and philosophy are not in line with the African precepts and philosophy as an African-based epistemology requires, leading concepts of interdependence, interconnectedness, reconciliation, collectivism, and solidarity. Let's read that again. Maslow's precepts of philosophy are not in line with the African precepts and philosophy as an African-based epistemology recognizes leading concepts of interdependence, interconnectedness, reconciliation, collectivism, and solidarity. These concepts are inherently non-egoist. The African reality and resulting pyramid can be seen as perpendicular to Maslow's reasonings, where he describes the freedom of the individual, for instance, for inquiry and expression. In the African context, such freedom must be regarded from a community perspective. In Maslow's thinking, the outset is an individual and her or his needs, after which the community could be seen as the total sum of the individuals it contains. From an indigenous African point of view, however, the outset starts with the community, after which an individual can be regarded as a particular derivative of the community. The researchers observed that behavior and characteristics can be well understood, developed, and evaluated within a social context. In many parts of Africa, however, these understandings with the social context are significantly different from those derived through a Western schema. What will count as a virtue rather than a voice or morally indifferent characteristic, however, is determined by the needs of social practices and by the location of those characteristics within the whole of the community's life story. This discordant situation calls for diversified perspectives on appropriate means of interactions in the world and guidance on misinterpretations of events. Maslow's theory leads to an approach that often regards human interaction as a negotiation of resources as if all resources are owned by the individual entity and its dissemination needs to be pursued through a process of negotiation. Again, this is how savages think. That's all this is. This is savage think. That everything is, is just business. Right? Let's come to some agreement. I remember being in a situation back in the day where I observed this Jewish guy. And he was talking to another guy. It was supposed something insignificant, like I forgot what it was now, but it was a research setting, and it was some like little thing. And the Jewish guy was like, well, just give me $1. Oy vey, just give me and it's just give him the damn thing. It was something so insignificant. But for this Jew, he had to get at least $1 for it. He could only feel good if he got $1 for whatever this little insignificant, something you could just give away, But that's how these savages think. If I give you something, you got over on me. And we are emulating some of this right now. We are emulating some of this stuff right now. In the African context, the process is mostly approached from a different perspective. Human interactions are foremost meant to establish relationships. When discussion on sharing of resources occurs, the perceived governing authority over the resource is considered to offer resource sharing as a means of strengthening the relationship. Yeah, when you try to say, it says that Jew accent. Yeah, I mean, that's how they go, just give me $1. Get your punk ass out here. Just get out of here, guy. Like, come on, man. And it's always accompanied with a little shitty grin. It's just stupid. And so you don't get to have real relationships under Western rule. Everything is about what can I get and how much can I get. And in fact, a lot of times, especially when it comes to Black folks under this system, our thoughts are about preventing ourselves from taking major losses, right? So it's like, sorry to go on and on, about this point, but it's like, if you've ever gone into, say, like a big purchase of something, there's always a fine print. And to be frank, in that fine print, in fact, I think Obama, when he came into office, I think Obama passed some law to cut down on all that fine print bullshit, because in the fine print was where they put basically all the ways in which you're going to take a loss. And so, like in America here, when you do business, the key thing you want to make sure when you do business here is that you're not taking an arm and a leg loss, right? You understand that you're going to take some loss, right? They're going to hit you somehow. And it's usually in the fine print, right? But what you want to guard against, you want to be able to read and understand enough of the fine print where they didn't just gain ownership of my children or something like that. That's how it is out here. And we are emulating some of this behavior now. That's not us. We got to get back to, really caring about our people, caring about each other. If we're going to do any kind of business, it's more of a sharing agreement, right? We're sharing the resource or resources, and we're strengthening our relationship in doing so because we're sharing. The result of the negotiation of the variance in human motivation is often personal and economic damage. The result of the negotiation of the variance in human motivations is often personal and economic damage, domination, and this is what I'm talking about. Right? When you do business out here, your aim is just not to take like complete losses. Your aim is to try to keep it close, and that's not the way we need to be doing business, right? So when we come around one another and we build, we reach out to others and try to build relationships and community, we got to keep this stuff in mind. We have to keep in mind that what we're doing is sharing the burden amongst our brothers and sisters, meaning that we don't take on these huge losses because we're actually sharing the resources, right? It's like if I have an office space and I could make do to fit in, Renee, or fit in Oni inside the office, and so now we each pay a third of the price for the office space. Like that's how we got to start operating with one another, Other than that, in this system, like it says here, expect economic damage in these relationships in the West. Expect some domination. Expect some systematic oppression. And right here, the question came up a couple weeks ago about what we need to be telling folks in 2021 as to why it's imperative to like join organization, become Pan-African minded and stuff like that. And this is kind of it too. Like when you do this stuff here, right? This is where you'll see that you won't be taking losses like you do under this Western system of oppression, right? Yeah, Renee Moore, or even that's what these punks out here do. Well, just give me $1. Oy vey. Just shut the fuck up. Okay. The absence of recognition of a large variety of motivations of human behavior gives rise to domination by hegemonic and individually oriented power, which in turn fuels inequality and social injustice. Right? So if you want to talk to people and build relationships and start to develop a community, right? You want to. This is some of the stuff you want to be talking about, right? Because to do anything otherwise is to set yourself up to be dominated. It's to set yourself up for the inequality that we see, and for the social injustice that we see. In the interactions between the Western economic and its social Maslow view of realities and African economics, relatio, and social Ubuntu view of realities, the predatory view, where a win-lose situation is acceptable, seems to dominate in the present. This whole paragraph is good. This whole paragraph, demonstrate that whole Jewish shit I was talking about earlier, right? to just give something of little value or use to you, to just give it to a fella, they take that as a loss, right? But if he gives you at least $1 for it, it's a win. Each culture and subculture. So now we have the conclusion. I hope you guys enjoyed this reading. You know, again, I do this stuff to shine a light on some of the ideologies we have to have, some of the ideologies we need to transmit when we talk about educating our future. So it's clear now when we talk about organizing, when we talk about education, when we talk about warring, you know, we really got to talk about what we developed in our history, which is this concept of seeing the humanness in each other and working together, you know, for the uplift of the community. Before I read the conclusion, let me take a break for station ID. One last time, so you guys can make sure to remember to tune in to all the other work that's going on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yeah, we're back now. We're at the conclusion. Make sure if you're listening live or otherwise, make sure you hit the thumbs up. I always repeat it every episode now that it helps with the algorithm, and also subscribe. There's two big components to the algorithm here on YouTube, actually. Especially when you're a small YouTuber, you got to get the subscriptions. And importantly, I want you guys to pay attention to this, those who are listening, especially on the playback. A small YouTuber needs the subscriptions to go up, and they need the listening or the watch hours. The watch hours have to go up. So the more people who watch a video for more hours, along with the subscriber numbers reaching a certain threshold, that starts to open up the channel. So if you want to help out the entities on KWAZ Radio, listen to their stuff. You know, listen twice if you have to. Listen, put it on mute and let it play, right? And while you do work in another tab. Those listen hours really do help. And make sure to share the content, you know, and share your thoughts as you share the content, because others might find something, you know, very interesting, very valid to their lives in the content that we produce. You know, so make sure to do those few things, and you will help small YouTubers like us at KWAZ Radio out immensely. All right. So we're at the conclusion now. Let me find my PDF again. Yes, in conclusion, each culture and subculture judges human behavior according to its own norms and values. Maslow's theory of human motivation is a widely accepted theoretical framework which grounds the development of other motivational theories. These theories are presented to be universal and to apply everywhere. See, this is the thing with these white guys, man. These white folks think some shit that they talking about applies to everyone else, right? It doesn't. However, these academic frames are grounded in one particular set of cultures only, the Western ones. We show the theory is not applicable in many parts of Africa. Our work shows that in many Africa settings, motivation is derived from the pursuit of relationships, the strengthening of community, the acknowledgement of authority, sharing of resources, and the avoidance of shame. They didn't really talk about the avoidance of shame in this paper, right? we conclude that Maslow's theory of human motivation does not represent a universal motivational theory. To facilitate better understanding of expectations and interpretations of realities, it is good to critique Maslow's thought by people embedded in non-Western contexts. It is equally important for those raised within Maslow's settings to understand the concepts of human motivation in other contexts of cultures. You know, it's funny, anyway, this paper has demonstrated that while Maslow's theory might be considered seminal work, the theory is not applicable to many African contexts owing to the huge differences in ideology. So that raises the question, is Maslow's theory really a seminal work? Comment below, let me know if you think his work is really, if it doesn't apply to everyone, is it really a seminal work? So anyway, I hope this was a fun reading for you guys. I hope it was insightful. If there's any questions in the chat room, post them now. If not, post them in the comment section below the video, and I'll respond to those later. I want to thank everyone who was on live with me today. Renee Moore, Pro Black Perspective, was on live, and however many other people were on live today. I appreciate you all. These so-called holidays are coming up. I see some of you Africans who, let me change that. Some of you foundational Black Americans and descendants of American slavery. I see y'all getting ready to celebrate Thanksgiving when apparently you guys are supposed to be Native Americans, right? How is it you're Native Americans but you're celebrating your slaughter? You see, this is what happens when dummies teach the goddamn class, right? Dummies don't know how to connect shit properly, and so now you don't know how to connect stuff properly. You know, Indians, or so-called Native Americans, also had slaves. So does that mean that you guys who complain about Africans, playing a role in the mafia, you guys were slaveholders too then? Since you're Native Americans, it's just, let's get oy vey. Anyway, thanks for listening. Only time I say thanks, fun reading. I appreciate that, brother. In any event, it was a blast to be here with you guys. Thursday is a so-called holiday, right? And I don't know if I will do a show Thursday or not. Maybe I might. Stay tuned. Keep your eyes on social media, and you'll know. Hit the bell on YouTube so you'll be informed as to when I'm on live, so you can hop on. And if not, I'll definitely be on by Saturday. Okay? So look out for me in the next few days. All right? Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.